Sarah Chen had always believed that ordinary Tuesday mornings were meant to be peaceful. At 28 years old, she worked as a nurse at the city's main hospital and cherished her quiet moments before her afternoon shift began. The small cafe on Maple Street had become her sanctuary over the past 2 years. She would sit at the corner table by the window, sipping her usual vanilla latte while reading medical journals or simply watching people pass by on the busy sidewalk. The cafe, called Morning Bliss, was owned by an elderly couple, Maria and Giuseppe, who had immigrated from Italy 30 years ago. They treated every customer like family, remembering names and favorite orders. Sarah loved the warm atmosphere they created with their genuine smiles and the smell of fresh pastries that filled the air every morning. On this particular Tuesday in November, Sarah arrived at her usual time of 10:30. The cafe was moderately busy with the typical crowd of college students, business people grabbing quick coffee, and a few retirees who made this their daily social gathering place. Sarah ordered her latte from Maria, who greeted her with the usual warm smile and asked about her work at the hospital. "Another busy night in the emergency room," Sarah replied, settling into her favorite corner table. "But I love helping people even when it's exhausting." Maria nodded knowingly. "You have a good heart, dear. That's why you're so good at what you do." Sarah opened her medical journal and began reading about new trauma treatment procedures. She was always eager to learn more about her field, believing that knowledge could save lives. The cafe's gentle buzz of conversation and the soft jazz music playing in the background created the perfect environment for concentration. At exactly 11:15, Sarah noticed 3 men enter the cafe. Something about their behavior immediately caught her attention. While most customers would glance around casually before choosing where to sit, these men surveyed the room with intense, calculating looks. They wore heavy winter coats despite the mild weather, and their eyes darted nervously toward the exits and windows. Sarah's nursing background had trained her to be observant. In the emergency room, she had learned to quickly assess situations and people, looking for signs that might indicate serious problems. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but she tried to dismiss the feeling as paranoia. The 3 men took a table near the center of the cafe, positioning themselves with clear views of both the front door and the back exit. They ordered coffee but barely touched their cups. Instead, they kept checking their watches and whispering to each other in what sounded like a foreign language Sarah couldn't identify. Giuseppe was behind the counter preparing sandwiches for the lunch crowd that would arrive soon. Maria continued serving customers with her usual cheerful demeanor, completely unaware of the tension Sarah was sensing. A young mother with twin toddlers sat near the window, letting her children color with crayons while she enjoyed a moment of peace. 2 college students were deep in discussion about their upcoming exams. Their textbooks spread across their table. Sarah tried to return her attention to the medical journal, but she found herself glancing at the 3 men every few minutes. Their behavior became increasingly suspicious. One of them kept reaching inside his coat, while another repeatedly looked toward the street as if waiting for something or someone. The peaceful atmosphere of Morning Bliss suddenly felt fragile to Sarah. She had worked in the emergency room long enough to recognize the signs of impending crisis. Her heart began beating faster, and she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came when she sensed danger. At 11:28, Sarah noticed a black van pull up directly in front of the cafe. The driver remained inside while the engine continued running. This detail sent chills down her spine because she remembered reading about similar tactics used in various attacks around the world. The 3 men inside the cafe immediately became more alert when they saw the van arrive. Sarah quietly reached for her phone, pretending to check messages while actually opening the emergency call function. She had learned during her medical training never to ignore her instincts when something felt dangerous. However, she also knew that calling authorities based solely on suspicious behavior could be wrong, and she didn't want to cause unnecessary panic. The young mother with the twins was now helping her children put away their crayons, preparing to leave. One of the college students had fallen asleep over his textbook while his friend continued studying. Giuseppe was humming an Italian song while arranging pastries in the display case, and Maria was wiping down tables with her usual methodical care. Everyone in Morning Bliss was going about their normal routines, completely unaware that Sarah's trained eye had detected what she believed to be signs of serious danger. She felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. If she was right about the threat, these innocent people were about to face something terrible. If she was wrong, she would look foolish and potentially cause unnecessary fear. Sarah's medical training had taught her that in crisis situations, preparation and quick thinking could mean the difference between life and death. She began mentally cataloging the cafe's layout, noting the locations of exits, potential hiding spots, and anything that could be used for protection. She observed that the kitchen had a back door, and there was a small storage room near the restrooms that might provide temporary safety. The three suspicious men were now checking their phones frequently, and Sarah noticed they were positioning themselves to have clear sightlines throughout the cafe. One man moved closer to the front entrance, another positioned himself near the counter, and the third remained at their original table with a clear view of everyone inside. At 11:32, Sarah saw one of the men nod toward the others. This simple gesture filled her with dread because it looked like a signal. Her nursing experience in trauma situations had taught her to trust these moments of intuitive recognition. She knew that whatever was about to happen, it was going to happen soon. Sarah closed her medical journal and casually placed it in her bag, keeping her movements natural to avoid drawing attention. She estimated there were approximately 15 people in the cafe, including Maria Giuseppe, the young mother with her twins, the college students, several business people, and a few elderly regulars who came every day. The black van outside remained parked with its engine running, and Sarah could see the driver occasionally looking toward the cafe entrance. Everything about this situation felt wrong, and her professional instincts were screaming that danger was imminent. She realized that within the next few minutes her ordinary Tuesday morning was about to become anything but peaceful. At exactly 11:34, the three men stood up simultaneously. Sarah's heart stopped as she watched the man nearest the front door reach inside his coat and pull out what was unmistakably a weapon. The peaceful morning atmosphere of morning bliss shattered in an instant as he shouted commands in heavily accented English, ordering everyone to get down on the floor. Chaos erupted throughout the small cafe. The young mother screamed and instinctively threw herself over her twin toddlers, trying to shield them with her body. The college students looked up from their books in confusion before the reality of the situation hit them. One of the elderly regulars, a man named Mr. Peterson who came every morning at 10, dropped his newspaper and stared in shock. Giuseppe emerged from behind the counter with flour on his apron, initially thinking someone was playing a cruel joke. His expression changed to horror when he saw the weapons the men were carrying. Maria, who had been wiping down a table near the window, froze with the cleaning cloth still in her hand, her kind face filled with terror. Sarah's medical training kicked in immediately. Instead of panicking like the other customers, she forced herself to remain calm and assess the situation. She had dealt with trauma and crisis situations countless times in the emergency room, and she knew that clear thinking was essential for survival. While everyone else was consumed by fear, Sarah's mind began working strategically. The three attackers were now spreading throughout the cafe, with their weapons visible and threatening. They were shouting in both English and their native language, creating confusion and fear. Sarah could see that their primary goal seemed to be controlling everyone inside the building, but she sensed this was only the beginning of whatever they had planned. From her position at the corner table, Sarah had a strategic advantage. She was partially hidden behind a large plant and could observe the entire scene without being immediately noticed by the attackers. She watched as they forced customers to lie face down on the floor, zip-tying their hands behind their backs with practiced efficiency. Sarah realized these were not amateur criminals. Their movements were coordinated and professional, suggesting extensive planning and training. They knew exactly what they were doing, and this terrified her more than anything else. Random violence was unpredictable, but organized terrorism was calculated and potentially much more dangerous. The man who appeared to be the leader began speaking into a small radio device, communicating with someone outside the cafe. Sarah strained to listen but couldn't understand his words. However, his tone suggested he was reporting that the initial phase of their operation had been successful. As the attackers continued securing the cafe, Sarah noticed something crucial. They had not yet spotted her in the corner. The large plant in her position against the wall had created a blind spot that gave her a few precious moments to think and plan. She knew this advantage would not last long, but she intended to use every second. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. She could try to escape through the window beside her table, but that would mean abandoning innocent people to face this crisis alone. Her medical oath to help others made this option feel impossible. She could try to hide and wait for police to arrive, but she had no idea if anyone had managed to call for help before the attackers took control. The third option was the most dangerous, but potentially the most helpful. Sarah could try to find a way to assist the people trapped inside the cafe. Her nursing background had given her skills in crisis management, and she knew how to remain calm under extreme pressure. She also knew basic first aid and could help if anyone was injured. Looking around the cafe, Sarah counted 15 people, including herself, Maria, and Giuseppe. The young mother was crying softly while trying to comfort her frightened twins. The college students were lying perfectly still, probably hoping to avoid drawing attention. Mr. Peterson appeared to be having difficulty breathing, possibly from the shock and stress of the situation. One of the attackers noticed Mr. Peterson's distress and kicked him roughly, shouting for him to be quiet. Sarah's medical instincts flared with anger at seeing an elderly man treated so cruelly, but she forced herself to remain hidden and continue observing. She knew that acting impulsively would only make the situation worse for everyone. The leader of the group was now speaking on his radio again, and Sarah caught fragments of English mixed with the foreign language. She heard words like secure, phase 2, and 10 minutes, which suggested they were following a specific timeline for whatever they had planned. Sarah noticed that the black van outside had been joined by a second vehicle, a dark sedan that parked across the street. She could see figures inside both vehicles, indicating that more people were involved in this operation than just the 3 inside the cafe. This realization made her understand that they were dealing with a much larger and more organized threat. The attackers were now searching through customers' belongings, taking phones and wallets. When they reached the young mother, she begged them not to hurt her children. One of the men laughed coldly and said something in his native language that made the others smile. Sarah felt sick watching their casual cruelty toward innocent people. Giuseppe tried to stand up, probably intending to protect Maria, but one of the attackers immediately forced him back down with a threatening gesture. The elderly Italian man's face was filled with helpless rage at being unable to defend his wife in his cafe. Maria was silently crying, her hands clasped together as if she were praying. Sarah knew she had to make a decision soon. The attackers were systematically working their way around the cafe, and it would only be minutes before they discovered her hiding spot. She could see that one of them was already looking in her direction, though he hadn't spotted her yet. In that moment, Sarah remembered something from her emergency room training. During active crisis situations, medical personnel were taught to prioritize saving the maximum number of lives possible. Sometimes this meant making difficult choices about who to help first, but it always meant thinking strategically rather than emotionally. Sarah realized she might be the only person in the cafe who was not yet under the attacker's control. This gave her a unique opportunity to potentially help the others, but she needed to be smart about how she used this advantage. She began formulating a plan that would require all of her medical training, her knowledge of human psychology, and more courage than she had ever needed in her life. The sound of sirens in the distance caught everyone's attention. The attackers immediately became more agitated, speaking rapidly to each other and into their radios. Sarah felt a moment of hope, thinking that help was coming. However, her optimism faded when she realized the sirens were growing fainter, not closer. They were probably responding to an unrelated emergency somewhere else in the city. The leader of the group seemed to interpret the distant sirens as a sign that they needed to accelerate their timeline. He began giving urgent instructions to his companions, and Sarah sensed that whatever they had planned for Phase 2 was about to begin. She knew her window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and soon she would have to act on whatever plan she could devise. Sarah watched in horror as the leader began separating the hostages into 2 groups. He pointed toward the young mother and her twins, directing them toward the back of the cafe near the kitchen. The college students and several business people were ordered to remain in the main dining area. Sarah realized they were organizing people for different purposes, and her medical training told her this was an extremely dangerous development. From her concealed position, Sarah could see that Mr. Peterson was getting worse. His breathing had become labored and his face was turning pale. She recognized the signs of a possible heart attack or severe anxiety episode. The elderly man needed immediate medical attention, but the attackers showed no concern for his condition. In fact, when he made a small groaning sound, one of them threatened him with violence. Sarah's mind raced through her options. As a nurse, she had taken an oath to help people in medical distress, but revealing herself now might eliminate her ability to help anyone. She forced herself to think strategically, knowing that acting on emotion alone could result in more people getting hurt or killed. The leader was now speaking into his radio with increased urgency. Sarah strained to listen and caught words that chilled her to the bone. She heard media, broadcast, and message, which suggested they intended to use this situation to communicate something to the outside world. This was not a simple robbery or random violence. These were terrorists with a specific agenda. One of the attackers began setting up what appeared to be a small camera near the front window. Sarah realized they were preparing to film something, probably involving the hostages. Her stomach turned as she understood that the innocent people in morning bliss were about to become part of some kind of propaganda message. Giuseppe was still lying on the floor near the counter, but Sarah could see him slowly moving his hand toward something underneath the register. She watched carefully and realized he was trying to reach what was probably a panic button or silent alarm system. If he could activate it without being noticed, help might actually be on the way. The young mother was now separated from most of the other hostages, holding her twins close to her body. The children were crying softly, and their mother was whispering reassurances while tears streamed down her face. Sarah's heart broke watching this scene, and she felt an overwhelming urge to do something to help them. Maria had been forced to stand behind the counter, probably because they wanted her to prepare something or operate the cafe equipment. Sarah noticed that Maria kept glancing toward the kitchen's back door, possibly thinking about escape routes. However, with armed men watching her every move, any attempt to flee would be extremely dangerous. The second vehicle that had arrived outside was now parked directly in front of the cafe's main entrance. Sarah could see armed figures inside, creating an additional barrier to any rescue attempts. She realized the attackers had planned this operation carefully, considering multiple scenarios and potential law enforcement responses. Sarah's nursing experience had taught her to assess resources during crisis situations. She mentally inventoried what might be useful in the cafe. The kitchen probably contained knives and other potential weapons, but getting to them would be nearly impossible. There were chairs and tables that could provide temporary barriers, and the storage room near the restrooms might offer hiding places for some people. The leader finished his radio communication and began addressing the hostages directly. His accent was thick, but his English was clear enough to understand. He told them they were now part of something much bigger than themselves, and that their situation would be broadcast to show the world their organization's power and dedication. Sarah felt sick as she realized the full scope of what was happening. These terrorists intended to use innocent people as props in their violent message. The young mother and her children, elderly Mr. Peterson, Giuseppe, and Maria, who had only wanted to serve good coffee and pastries to their community, none of them deserved to become victims of someone else's political agenda. One of the attackers noticed Giuseppe's subtle movement toward the panic button and immediately grabbed the elderly Italian man by his collar, dragging him away from the counter. Giuseppe cried out in pain, and Maria started to move toward her husband before being roughly pushed back by another terrorist. Sarah watched this scene with growing anger, but she forced herself to remain calm and hidden. The camera was now fully set up, and the leader began testing its operation. Sarah realized they were probably planning to broadcast live, which meant law enforcement might not even know what was happening inside the cafe yet. If she was going to do anything to help these people, she needed to act soon before the situation became completely controlled by the terrorists. Sarah noticed that one of the attackers had moved closer to her area while organizing hostages. She pressed herself further back against the wall behind the large plant, hoping to remain undetected for a few more crucial minutes. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was afraid it might give away her position. Mr. Peterson made another groaning sound, and this time Sarah could see he was clutching his chest. The signs were unmistakable. He was having a heart attack. Without immediate medical intervention, he could die within minutes. Sarah faced an impossible choice: reveal herself to help save his life, or remain hidden and potentially watch him die while hoping to help the others later. The young mother was now being positioned in front of the camera, with her twins clinging to her legs. The terrorist holding the camera began giving instructions about where she should look and what she should say. Sarah realized they were preparing to use this family as part of their propaganda message, probably to generate maximum emotional impact for their audience. Giuseppe had managed to whisper something to Maria in Italian, and Sarah saw Maria's expression change slightly. She wondered if they had discussed some kind of emergency plan for situations like this. Many business owners in urban areas had protocols for dealing with robberies or other crises, and the elderly couple might have prepared for such possibilities. The leader began speaking into his radio again, and Sarah heard him mention a time, 15 minutes. She realized they were working within a specific schedule, probably coordinated with other activities or locations. This suggested they were part of a larger terrorist operation, possibly with multiple targets. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She could not remain hidden while Mr. Peterson died from a heart attack and innocent families were terrorized for political purposes. Her medical training and personal values would not allow her to be a passive observer when she might be able to help. She knew revealing herself was extremely dangerous, but she also knew that doing nothing was not an option she could live with. Sarah slowly reached into her bag and quietly pulled out her medical supplies. As a nurse, she always carried basic emergency equipment: a stethoscope, blood pressure cuff, emergency medications, and other life-saving tools. She had never imagined she would need to use them during a terrorist attack. But her professional instincts were taking over her decision-making process. Sarah took a deep breath and made the decision that would define the rest of this crisis. She slowly stood up from behind the plant, raising her hands to show she was not a threat, and spoke in a calm, professional voice that cut through the chaos of the cafe. "I'm a registered nurse," she announced clearly, looking directly at the leader of the group. "That man is having a heart attack and will die without immediate medical attention. I need to help him." The sudden appearance of someone who had been hidden shocked everyone in the cafe, including the terrorists. The leader immediately pointed his weapon at Sarah, shouting angrily in his native language before switching to English. He demanded to know how long she had been hiding and whether she had contacted anyone outside. Sarah kept her hands raised and maintained eye contact with the leader, using techniques she had learned for dealing with agitated patients in the emergency room. "I haven't called anyone," she said calmly. "I've been here the whole time and I saw you arrive. That man needs medical help right now, or he's going to die in front of your camera." The mention of their camera and the potential impact of having someone die during their broadcast seemed to get the leader's attention. Sarah recognized that she had touched on something important to their plans. They clearly wanted to control the message they were sending, and having a hostage die from a heart attack might not serve their purposes. Mr. Peterson was now clearly in severe distress, his breathing shallow and his skin turning gray. Sarah could see that he had only minutes before his condition became irreversible. She knew she was taking an enormous risk by revealing herself, but her medical training would not allow her to watch someone die when she could potentially save them. "Let me help him," Sarah repeated, lowering her hands slowly to show her medical bag. "I have equipment and medication that can stabilize him. It will only take a few minutes." The terrorists had a rapid discussion in their native language while keeping their weapons trained on Sarah. She could see they were debating what to do with this unexpected development. Finally, the leader made a decision that surprised everyone, including his own companions. "You help him," he said to Sarah, "but you do exactly what I say. Any wrong move and everyone here dies." Sarah nodded and quickly moved toward Mr. Peterson, who was now unconscious. She knelt beside him and immediately began her medical assessment, checking his pulse and breathing while pulling emergency medication from her bag. The other hostages watched in amazement as Sarah transformed from a hidden observer into a professional medical responder. "He's having a severe heart attack," Sarah announced while administering medication. "His heart rhythm is dangerously irregular. I need to give him nitroglycerin and monitor his vital signs." As Sarah worked to stabilize Mr. Peterson, she was also carefully observing everything around her. She noticed that the terrorists were watching her intently, fascinated by her medical procedures. This gave her an idea that might help the other hostages as well. "The stress and fear are making everyone's health worse," Sarah said while continuing to work on Mr. Peterson. "That woman with the children is showing signs of severe anxiety that could lead to panic attacks. The elderly woman behind the counter might be developing chest pains from the stress. Sarah was using her medical knowledge strategically, making the terrorists aware that their actions were creating health emergencies that could complicate their plans. She hoped this might make them more willing to treat the hostages humanely. The leader seemed intrigued by Sarah's professional competence. He began asking questions about the medical conditions of the other hostages, and Sarah realized he was concerned about maintaining control over the situation. Dead or severely ill hostages would not serve their propaganda purposes. While checking Mr. Peterson's improving vital signs, Sarah noticed that Giuseppe had been watching her carefully. When their eyes met briefly, she saw him glance toward the kitchen and back to her. She realized he was trying to communicate something important, possibly about escape routes or hidden resources. "I need to check the other hostages for medical problems," Sarah told the leader while Mr. Peterson's condition stabilized. High-stress situations can trigger various health emergencies, especially in elderly people and children. The leader considered this request while speaking into his radio. Sarah could tell he was receiving instructions from whoever was coordinating this operation. Finally, he nodded and told her she could examine the other hostages, but warned her against trying anything clever. Sarah moved first to Maria, who was indeed showing signs of severe stress. While checking her pulse and blood pressure, Sarah quietly whispered in Italian, having learned some phrases during her nursing training. She asked Maria if there were any emergency exits or communication devices in the cafe. Maria's eyes widened slightly, and she whispered back that there was a landline phone in the storage room and a back door from the kitchen that led to an alley. This information could be crucial if Sarah found an opportunity to call for help or assist people in escaping. Next, Sarah moved to check on the young mother and her twins. The children were terrified but physically unharmed. However, the mother was showing classic signs of severe anxiety and potential shock. Sarah used this examination as an opportunity to quietly reassure the family while gathering more information about the cafe's layout. "The children are frightened, but okay," Sarah reported to the leader. "Their mother needs to stay calm to help them through the situation. Extreme stress can cause people to make unpredictable decisions." Sarah was deliberately using psychological principles to influence the terrorists' behavior. By positioning herself as a medical expert who could help maintain order, she was creating value for herself in their operation. This might give her opportunities to protect the other hostages. The college students were next, and Sarah found them to be physically healthy, but emotionally traumatized. While examining them, she noticed one student had a phone hidden in his sock. She caught his attention and shook her head slightly, warning him not to try using it while the terrorists were watching. As Sarah continued her medical assessments, she was building a mental map of resources and opportunities. She knew where emergency exits were located, which hostages might be able to assist in escape attempts, and what medical supplies were available. Most importantly, she was establishing herself as an essential person in the terrorists' operation. The leader was now receiving more frequent radio communications, and Sarah could tell their timeline was accelerating. She heard mentions of Phase 3 and final preparation, which suggested the situation was about to change dramatically. Whatever they had planned beyond taking hostages, it was approaching quickly. Sarah realized that her decision to reveal herself had bought some time and potentially saved Mr. Peterson's life, but it had also placed her in a position of enormous responsibility. She was now the link between the terrorists and the hostages, and her actions could determine whether these innocent people lived or died. The leader's radio crackled with urgent instructions, and Sarah could see his expression growing more intense. He began barking orders to his companions, and they started repositioning the hostages according to some predetermined plan. Sarah realized that whatever they intended to broadcast was about to begin, and she needed to act quickly if she was going to help these people. "I need to check the storage room for additional medical supplies," Sarah told the leader. Thinking of the landline phone Maria had mentioned, "Some of these people will need ongoing monitoring, and I'm running low on equipment." The leader looked suspicious but seemed to recognize the logic in her request. He assigned one of his men to escort Sarah to the storage room, while keeping weapons trained on the other hostages as insurance for her cooperation. Sarah knew this might be her only chance to call for help. As they walked toward the storage room, Sarah noticed the terrorist escorting her seemed younger and more nervous than the others. She decided to try a different approach with him, using the psychological techniques she had learned for dealing with anxious patients and their families. "What's your name?" she asked quietly as they reached the storage room door. The young man looked surprised by her question and didn't answer immediately. Sarah continued, "You seem different from the others. Are you okay with what's happening to these innocent people?" The question clearly affected him. Sarah could see doubt and conflict in his expression, though he tried to maintain his threatening demeanor. She realized he might be the weak link in their operation, someone who could potentially be reasoned with or convinced to help. Inside the storage room, Sarah quickly located the landline phone while pretending to search for medical supplies. The young terrorist was watching her, but she could tell he was struggling with internal conflict about the situation. Sarah took a calculated risk and spoke to him directly. "Those children out there are scared and innocent," she said while quietly lifting the phone receiver. "Their mother is just trying to protect them. The elderly couple has spent their lives serving this community. These aren't your enemies. They're just people trying to live peaceful lives." The young man's weapon wavered slightly, and Sarah could see tears forming in his eyes. She realized he had been coerced or manipulated into participating in this attack, and his conscience was fighting against his orders. This gave her an opportunity she hadn't expected. "You could help them," Sarah whispered while dialing emergency services. "You could be the person who saves innocent lives instead of taking them. That would take real courage." Before the young terrorist could respond, Sarah heard the emergency operator answer. She quickly whispered the cafe's address and said, "Terrorist attack in progress. Multiple hostages." Before the young man realized what was happening and grabbed the phone from her. However, instead of immediately reporting her actions to his leader, the young terrorist stood frozen, staring at the phone in his hands. Sarah could see he was having a complete internal breakdown about his role in this operation. She pressed her advantage by continuing to appeal to his conscience. "You just helped save those people," she told him quietly. "Help is coming because you allowed me to make that call. You can still choose to be on the right side of this." The sound of the leader shouting from the main cafe area broke the moment. He was demanding their immediate return, and Sarah knew they had run out of time for this conversation. However, she had accomplished two crucial things. Emergency services had been notified, and she had potentially turned one of the terrorists into an ally. When they returned to the main area, Sarah could see the leader was setting up for what appeared to be a live broadcast. The camera was positioned to show the hostages, and he had prepared a statement that he intended to read. Sarah realized this was the culmination of their plan. They wanted to broadcast their message using innocent people as props. "The medical situation is under control," Sarah reported to the leader. "Hoping to buy more time, but I need to continue monitoring several people, especially the elderly man and the children. Stress can cause sudden medical emergencies." The leader seemed satisfied with her report and turned his attention to the broadcast preparation. Sarah used this moment to make eye contact with as many hostages as possible, trying to communicate that help was coming without alerting the terrorists. She especially focused on Giuseppe, who she sensed might be planning something. As the leader began his broadcast, speaking into the camera about political grievances and demands, Sarah noticed movement outside the cafe windows. She could see what appeared to be law enforcement personnel taking positions across the street and in nearby buildings. Her emergency call had worked and a rescue operation was being organized. However, Sarah also realized that the arrival of law enforcement could make the situation more dangerous for the hostages. Cornered terrorists might become more violent, and any rescue attempt could result in casualties. She needed to find a way to help from inside while the authorities worked from outside. The young terrorist who had escorted her to the storage room was now standing near the back of the cafe, clearly struggling with his role in the operation. Sarah could see him watching the hostages with obvious distress, and she sensed he was looking for an opportunity to distance himself from what was happening. Giuseppe caught Sarah's attention and subtly gestured toward the kitchen. She realized he was indicating something important, possibly an escape route or a way to disrupt the terrorists' plans. Maria was positioned behind the counter where she had access to kitchen equipment that could potentially be used as weapons. The leader's broadcast was becoming more aggressive and threatening. He was using the hostages as visual props to emphasize his political message, and Sarah could see he was working himself into a more dangerous emotional state. She knew from her medical experience that highly agitated individuals could become unpredictable and violent. Sarah made a decision that would require precise timing and tremendous risk. She had identified potential allies among the hostages, possibly turned one terrorist, and confirmed that law enforcement was organizing outside. Now she needed to create an opportunity for everyone to act simultaneously. "The elderly man is having complications," Sarah announced suddenly, interrupting the broadcast. "His heart rhythm is becoming unstable again. I need to treat him immediately, or he could go into cardiac arrest on camera." This created exactly the disruption Sarah wanted. The leader stopped his broadcast and turned his attention to the medical emergency, giving Sarah an opportunity to position herself strategically while the other hostages prepared for what she hoped would be a coordinated escape attempt. The next few minutes would determine whether Sarah's calculated risks would save lives or result in tragedy for everyone trapped inside Morning Bliss Café. Sarah knelt beside Mr. Peterson, who was actually stable but unconscious, and began making exaggerated medical procedures while secretly communicating with Giuseppe through eye contact. She had positioned herself so she could see the entire cafe, and she noticed the young terrorist near the back was now openly crying and shaking. The leader was growing frustrated with the interruption to his broadcast. He began shouting at Sarah to hurry up, but she maintained her professional composure while continuing to buy precious time. She could see shadows moving outside the windows, indicating that law enforcement was getting into position for a potential rescue operation. "His condition is critical," Sarah announced loudly. "I need someone to help me move him to a better position. The stress from your broadcast is making everyone's medical conditions worse." At that moment, the young terrorist near the back made a decision that changed everything. He suddenly threw his weapon down and shouted in English, "I can't do this anymore. These are innocent people." His betrayal of the operation created the chaos Sarah had been waiting for. The leader spun around in fury, momentarily taking his attention off the hostages. Giuseppe, who had been waiting for exactly this moment, lunged toward the kitchen where Maria had positioned herself near a large pot of boiling water. The elderly Italian man moved with surprising speed for his age, diving behind the counter as Maria threw the scalding water at the nearest terrorist. Sarah immediately shouted, "Everyone down!" while pulling Mr. Peterson toward the storage room. The college students, understanding that this was their chance, overturned their heavy wooden table to create a barrier. The young mother grabbed her twins and ran toward the kitchen's back door, following the escape route Maria had indicated earlier. The leader tried to regain control by firing warning shots, but the cafe had erupted into complete pandemonium. Sarah saw the young terrorist who had defected trying to help other hostages reach safety, proving that her appeal to his conscience had worked. He was now using his knowledge of the operation to help people escape, rather than harm them. Giuseppe emerged from behind the counter wielding a large kitchen knife, his protective instincts fully activated despite his age. "You want to hurt innocent people in my cafe?" he shouted in heavily accented English. "You picked the wrong old man to mess with." Sarah helped several hostages reach the storage room, while using her medical bag to shield them from potential gunfire. She could hear sirens getting closer, and saw flashes of movement outside that indicated law enforcement was preparing to enter the building. Her emergency phone call had mobilized a full response team. Maria had armed herself with a heavy cast iron pan and was positioning herself to protect anyone trying to reach the kitchen's back exit. Despite her small stature and gentle demeanor, the elderly Italian woman had transformed into a fierce protector of her customers and community. The remaining two loyal terrorists were now completely overwhelmed by the coordinated resistance they faced. They had expected to control frightened, passive hostages, but instead found themselves fighting determined people who refused to be victims. Their carefully planned operation was falling apart rapidly. The leader made a desperate attempt to regain control by grabbing the young mother, but one of the college students tackled him from behind. The student had played football in high school and used his athletic training to bring down the terrorist before he could hurt the family. Sarah saw that the defected terrorist was now actively helping hostages escape through the kitchen's back door. He was shouting instructions in English about how to avoid the other terrorists outside, using his insider knowledge to save the people he had originally been sent to terrorize. Mr. Peterson regained consciousness during the chaos and, despite his heart condition, grabbed one of the fallen weapons. "I fought in Vietnam," he announced with surprising strength in his voice. "I'm too old and too stubborn to let punks like these hurt innocent people." The cafe's front door suddenly exploded inward, as law enforcement tactical teams entered with overwhelming force. They had been listening to the situation through surveillance equipment and timed their entry to coincide with the internal uprising Sarah had helped coordinate. Within seconds, the remaining terrorists were surrounded and disarmed by professional law enforcement officers. The leader, who had seemed so intimidating minutes earlier, was now face down on the floor with his hands zip-tied behind his back, the same restraints he had planned to use on his victims. Sarah immediately began coordinating medical triage for everyone in the cafe, working with the paramedics who followed the tactical teams. She assessed each person for physical injuries and psychological trauma, ensuring that everyone received appropriate medical attention. The young terrorist who had defected was taken into custody, but treated differently from his companions. Sarah made sure to tell the officers about his crucial role in helping the hostages escape, believing that his change of heart had saved multiple lives. Giuseppe and Maria were reunited in emotional embrace, both crying with relief that their ordeal was over. Their cafe was damaged but could be repaired, and more importantly, their community had come together to resist evil when it tried to destroy their peaceful morning gathering place. The young mother and her twins were physically unharmed, but understandably traumatized. Sarah arranged for them to receive counseling services and made sure they had ongoing medical support. The children would need time to process what they had experienced, but they were safe. As news crews arrived and the story spread across social media, people were amazed by what had happened inside Morning Bliss Café. Instead of the propaganda message the terrorists had planned to broadcast, the world saw a story of ordinary people who refused to surrender to fear and violence. Sarah found herself being called a hero by reporters and law enforcement officials, but she insisted that everyone in the cafe had played important roles in their survival. Giuseppe and Maria's courage, the college student's quick thinking, Mr. Peterson's determination, and even the young terrorist's change of heart had all contributed to the successful outcome. In the weeks that followed, Morning Bliss Café was completely renovated and reopened with a memorial plaque, honoring the courage shown by everyone present during the attack. Sarah continued working as a nurse but also began teaching crisis response classes to help other people prepare for emergency situations. The story of what happened that Tuesday morning became legendary in the community and beyond. It demonstrated that when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances, they are capable of remarkable courage and compassion. Sarah had remained steady when terrorists stormed the cafe, and what she did next had indeed left everyone stunned. She had turned victims into survivors and fear into resistance. The young terrorist who defected was eventually granted clemency in exchange for information about the larger terrorist network. He credited Sarah's appeal to his conscience as the moment he realized he could choose to save lives rather than take them. His testimony helped prevent other planned attacks and led to the arrest of additional terrorist operatives. Sarah never forgot the lesson she learned that morning. In crisis situations, maintaining calm and thinking strategically could mean the difference between tragedy and triumph. Her medical training had prepared her to save lives, but that day taught her that sometimes saving lives required more than medical knowledge. It required courage, compassion, and the willingness to risk everything for others. The cafe attack became a case study in crisis management and civilian response to terrorism. Sarah's actions were analyzed and taught to law enforcement, medical personnel, and emergency responders around the world. Her story proved that heroes are not born. They are ordinary people who make extraordinary choices when faced with impossible circumstances.